7:01, and call the Village of Webster Board meeting for January 9, 2020 to order. And Carl, if you would lead us please in the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would all stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Seated. Our first order of business will be public comment. If there is anyone who would like to address the board this evening, I will ask you to do so now. It's open. We have a microphone that's over here. Today. Okay, if there is no one who would like to address the board, I will close the public comment portion of the meeting. And first order of business is going to be a little bit out of order, but I don't know how long it will be here. It's good to see you here, however, this evening.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
It's going to be item number 1, and that is a resolution to accept the Clean Water State Revolving Fund grant in the amount of $1,414,250. We are asking tonight for approval of this grant, the State Revolving Fund grant. And if we choose to proceed with it, upon approving this, the village would be, it would be upon the village to execute an agreement with the EFC no later than June 25th, 2021. However, requested that all items be submitted to the EFC by January 31st, approximately 1 year from now, 2021. So I'm asking for a motion to accept the New York State Clean Water State Revolving Fund grant, because this acceptance has to be by January 17th of this year.
I make that motion to accept this grant.
Are you a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. So, that's giving us a timeline, and I think it's a good timeline for us to follow. Okay, next order of business. I know we went out of order, but the next order of business is going to be, after a bit of a delay,
Yes.
welcome in the new year, Laura Landers will be presenting to us the financial audit statements.
Thank you, Mayor. And I would like to just start with the financial statements themselves. As I've done in the past, to go through and present the highlights to the board. Again, if drafts were provided, they were reviewed by management and the mayor. Any comments were provided back to us, and we incorporated those comments into these finals. So management and mayor have had a chance to review. However, we, due to, some of the delays and turnover in personnel, usually I would meet with the mayor to review the drafts, but that just didn't work out this year, and hopefully we can get that back on schedule again with Marcia here, this coming year then. So with that, financial statements are for the audit for the village's year-end, May 31st, 2019. We issued what we call an unmodified opinion on the financial statements of the governmental activities and the business type activities of the village, which is the village's sewer fund. In the current year, and we've talked about this in the last couple of years, is there was an implementation of a new standard, GASB Statement Number 75, related to other post-employment benefit obligations. And we do have an emphasis of that matter in our independent auditor's report. A couple things to note, that as a result of this statement being implemented in the current year, there would be a restatement of net position for both the governmental activities, which is the majority of that is the general fund of the village, and the sewer fund. And there are some significant changes in the note disclosures related to the village's other post-employment benefits, which are on page 24 of the footnotes. And we'll kind of just go through those, but probably the most significant change that relates to 75 is that under 45, the previous standard, that the other post-employment benefit liability was being amortized over a 30-year period. What 75 does is it says that amortization is gone, and they had, the village had to have a new valuation performed as of May 31st, 2019. So that entire liability is now presented on these financial statements. For the general fund, because it's a governmental fund, really no change related to the general fund itself and the fund balance and those reports that the board would be looking at on a monthly basis and that you would be budgeting for. In the general fund, that entire liability is being reported in the government-wide statements. So no impact really in what you would see in the general fund. For the sewer fund, because it is a business type activity, whatever would be allocated to employees that there are other post-employment benefits, there would be an allocation of that liability to the sewer fund. So that's a little bit about what 75 is going to, or did impact the financial statements for 5/31/19. The other thing is that the village was only required to have a valuation for this liability every 3 years, and now what's going to happen is you have to have a valuation, a full valuation every other year, and in the interim year you have to have an interim valuation. The reason is that the calculations, and it relates to deferred outflows and inflows related to other post-employment benefits. The calculation has become quite difficult under 75, and therefore, you do need to have an interim valuation. The only, good thing about it is the interim valuation should be less in cost than what a full valuation would be. But again, that's something that you'll have to speak to the actuarial about and, get a price quote on that. So that's really the big news for the financial statements for 5/31/19 is that standard. So onto the financial statements themselves, pages 3 and 4 are what we call the government-wide financial statements. They list all the activities of the governmental activities and the business type activities, which is the sewer fund. And these statements incorporate all of the activity. That includes any capital assets, net of depreciation, any long-term liabilities, such as bonds payable, compensated absences, and as we spoke about, other post-employment benefits. So that's what these two statements are. They're presenting the village in total and all the activity that relates to the village. Not unusual that you would see that the unrestricted net position is now in a negative net position. Probably, I would say, for the majority of our municipalities, once 75 was implemented, because you have a significant liability that's coming onto these statements. We saw a lot of municipalities that, for the governmental activities and even the business type activities, that this unrestricted number went into a deficit position. So I would just say, don't be alarmed about it, because it's the government-wide statements. It doesn't really impact your general fund, but just know that that's very typical of what we were seeing across the board with municipalities, you know, when they implemented 75. On page, so that's page 3 is a statement of net position. On page 4 is the other government-wide statement, which is the statement of activities. What this presents is all of the expenses for the governmental activities by function or program, and the program revenues. You know, what part of this is to show is that showing that the governmental activities, here are the expenses, here are the program revenues that relate to those particular functions, and then this is the net expense or revenue of those particular functions, which the majority of those are then covered by what we call general revenues. They don't relate to any particular function. They're typically your sales tax, mortgage tax, and real property taxes. And down at the bottom, you can see we have net position, deficit beginning as restated, and we refer to note 5. And note 5 in the footnotes to the financial statement is the note that has the restatement of the net position for the implementation of GASB number 75. Then on page 5, we start what we call the fund basis statements. Page 5 is the governmental funds, and for the village they consist of the general fund, the capital projects fund, which the majority of the activity in capital projects fund for 2019 was North Avenue project, and then the non-major Parks and Recreation Fund. The general fund ended the year with a little over 1.5 million of fund balance. Non-spendable amount of that really relates to amounts that are due from the sewer fund as a due from other funds. And the unassigned fund balance, which is the amount that you as the board have the opportunity to use any way that you choose, ended up with about a $480,000 balance. Now, when we look at that compared to the current year expenditures, that's kind of about the only benchmark that we can utilize, because it's a governmental, it's a government and it's a governmental fund. That number represents about 17%. So you're right in the mix of where you should be. State Controller's Office is not going to say, here's the number that you have to hit, but somewhere between that 10 and 25% is, and again, this is determined by you as the board, what you deem is reasonable of what that unassigned percentage would be. But as kind of a benchmark, between 10 and 25% is a typical benchmark to be looking at for that. And again, the capital projects, that activity, once North Avenue is completed, capital projects will be closed out, and you'll move on to the next capital project. Which I hear that may be happening, right? So on the next page is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. And you can see before transfers out, the general fund actually had a small surplus, a little over $15,000 in the current year. But there was a transfer out of about $300,000, and that was a decision made by the board to transfer money from the general fund to the capital projects fund for the village's share for the North Avenue project. So that's reflected in that transfer out, and you can see that that transfer out is equal to the transfer in over in the capital projects column. But so overall, if you took out those transfers, we have a small interfund transfer in for some contributions was made to the general fund from the parks fund. So, you know, the general fund ended with a small surplus then of $15,000 plus the $8,000 coming in from parks, so about $23,000. You know, still fund balances are healthy. The only concern that I would say is the amount of money that is owed from the sewer fund to the general fund. That the 569,000. On page 8 is the statement of net position for what we call the enterprise fund, which is the village's sewer fund. So you can see we have assets, we have capital assets, which, you know, you would typically think in a business type activity like this, capital assets are going to be your biggest component of this statement of net position. A lot of infrastructure, a lot of buildings, machinery, equipment. Current liabilities were $681,000. The majority of that $681,000 is $569,000 that is owed to the general fund. And then you have serial bonds payable, you have compensated absences. You can see the sewer fund share of the post-employment benefit obligations is a little over $1 million. And then we have the sewer fund share of the New York State net pension liability, which is about $80,000. This brings us down to the net investment in capital assets. This is your capital assets less depreciation, less any debt, general obligation debt, serial bonds, loans that would relate to the capital assets in the sewer fund. And that's about $633,000. And then we have an unrestricted deficit of about $1.7 million. Again, I would say that, but in the sewer fund's case, yes, there is this issue with the, the allocation of the post-employment obligations related to the implementation of 75. However, the sewer fund has been running a deficit, and that has been borne out in that the funds have had to be borrowed from the general fund for operational purposes. The next page is the statement of revenues and expenses and changes in that position. You can see in the current year there's an operating loss of about $228,000. There are interest earnings, and there's the special assessment, which isn't part of the operations, but that special assessment was $141,000. That brought the actual loss down to $117,000 at the end of the year. And the next page is the cash flows for the sewer fund. I'd say one of the things that I'd like to point out is that we typically look at the very top section, which is the cash flows from operating activities. And we say, okay, if that's a positive, that's at least an assurance to you as the board that the operations are generating enough cash to cover, cash in, cash out. In this case, in the sewer fund, there's a net cash used by operations of about $41,000. Now, you can connect that against the next section down. It includes the special assessments. So, if you really looked at that, the net cash in would be $100,000. But you also had to have $60,000 in interfund loans which is loans from the general fund, influx of cash to pay bills. Because you had, you paid out cash for acquisition, construction of capital assets, you had principal payments on debt, and you had interest on debt. The total of all of those was a little over 200,000. So I always like to look at this statement. To me, in a business type activity, this is the best statement because that shows you, here's the cash in, cash out. Here's the cash at the beginning of the year, here's the cash at the end of the year. So you can see, in this case, yes, if you add in the special assessment, the operations are generating a positive cash flow of 100. But you also have debt service, principal and interest, that is basically eating into that, not leaving you a lot of cash to go ahead and do your acquisition and construction of capital assets that you need to do. The next page is just the agency fund. It's really just assets and liabilities. That's only about 14,000. And then the footnotes to the financial statements. I would just like to look at those couple that that I mentioned regarding the OPEB, which starts on page 24, and that's the what they've done in as far as the statement 75 is, if you're familiar with last year and looking at the pension note from the New York State Employees Retirement System, that a lot of the kind of information that is being presented here appears more like the pension note. So there's a lot of information in here now talking about who's covered in the village's plan, what the actuarial assumptions are related to the plan, what the changes in that OPEB liability are from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, looking at those assumptions and saying, if there was a change in the discount rate, if there was a change in the healthcare cost trend rate, either up or down, this is how it would impact that liability that the village has. There are some deferred inflows and outflows now related to OPEB, like there are with the pension liability, or with the pension system. So I would just say, you could take a read through that. You don't have to thoroughly understand it, but you can at least see that here are the assumptions that the actuary is putting out there. Here is how that liability could change. And the caveat here is that the village really has no possible way to even start funding this liability because the legislation has not been passed in New York State to allow municipalities to actually establish trust funds to start funding this liability. So it's out there, it's on your government-wide statements, it is what it is, and that's pretty much the way that you have to look at it. Until New York State passes that legislation to allow municipalities to fund that liability. And then the last note that I wanted to look at was just on page 32, and that's the restatement of net position. So it just shows, this note shows the net position at the beginning of the year previously, before the implementation of 75, and then what the net position is after the implementation of 75. And you could see that the beginning plan liability under statement 75 was a little over 3 million, and the net position actually went down from 5.6 million to about 3 million for the governmental activities, and a net position deficit in the sewer fund of about 39,000 to about 983,000 deficit. So that's what that putting that liability and implementing that statement. I mean, we were really only probably 8 years, I think, into the 30-year amortization. So there was a significant liability for all municipalities that have other post-employment benefits. Significant liability that was coming on to the governmental financial statements with the implementation of this standard. And then the rest of this, the information back here is just required supplementary information related to the pensions, related to the other post-employment benefits, and the general fund original budget, modified budget versus actual. Any questions? Yes? Management report, which is the separate report we have here. This includes pages 1 and 2 are just our required communications to you as the governing board. We didn't encounter, I mean, the difficulty we encountered, and hence why we're here this late in the season when we're usually here in October, is obviously a changeover in personnel and the critical position of the village treasurer, and gathering information and getting information supplied to us so that we could have the supporting documentation that we needed for the audit, and finding that information and getting the books closed out for the year ending May. So that was the difficulty that we encountered. Pages 3 and 4 are what we call our summary of significant estimates that are included in the financial statements. Pages 5 and 6 are recorded audit adjustments. As you can see, there's some significant adjustments here that had to be made from the original trial balances that were provided to us. I anticipate that will be much less this next year. And we had we didn't have any current year uncorrected misstatements. The only thing that was a reversal of a prior year uncorrected. That just means it was an immaterial amount. We have to present it here to the governing board. However, we could pass on it because it was, in the prior year, it was only $14,000. There are some new standards that are coming up. I don't expect any of them to have any real significance like 75 for any of these ones coming up, so I'm not really too concerned about that. And then we have our communication, and unfortunately, due to the significance of those audit adjustments and the number of audit adjustments, the dollar amount of the adjustments, we had to report in this year a material weakness related to the village's financial accounting and reporting. I would anticipate that this material weakness will be addressed and should be addressed, and that we would not have this in here for the management report for 5/31/20. And the last piece is the representation letter that we provided at the conclusion of the audit. Typically, the village treasurer would sign that, but we made the mayor put his signature on it this year because didn't feel that it was right that Marcia would be signing this since this all relates to a year that she was not even here. So that's the last piece of this document.
Very good.
Any questions?
Is there a time frame in which the loan from the sewer fund to the general fund to the sewer fund needs to be paid back?
It technically is supposed to be paid back by the end of the fiscal year. This is something that I think the board.
So at some point is the
board
controller's office going to come and slap somebody's hand?
Well, I could say this, that, you know, that when the AUD gets submitted, the annual update document gets submitted to New York State, I have had a couple of, for ones that we prepare for clients, I've had the State Controller's Office send me emails back with some various questions, and a couple times I've seen questions that say, have you considered that, you know, these are, you know, if they're, you know, current or that they're going to be addressed. But we kind of tried to address that, Don, in saying that we've set aside a piece of the general fund balance in that non-spendable category for the amount of those loans, or, you know, amounts of loans that have occurred over the period of a couple of years, and said, this piece has been set aside in the general fund. I think if the State Controller's Office sees that, what that indicates to them is at least you've been proactive and you've said, you know, there's a possibility that this won't be paid back. So therefore, what's going to happen is that would be a reduction in the general fund balance. So, but I would like the board to think about and come up with maybe some kind of a schedule of, you know, a repayment schedule. You know, even if it's something, you know, $10,000, $15,000 a year to, but that's a little hard to do when you still have to currently be borrowing money for operational purposes.
Yeah, I think when they divided it out, they just put the excess into the general fund. When they divided the sewer in the general, they didn't put anything in to help them like we had for the general. They just put it all over in the general. And I think that's part of it, and so now we've got to go back. And then we lost huge amounts of revenue from the sludge and everything else that we were doing with that lawsuit. So, yeah, we've got to...
Yeah.
But
Yeah, some work to do there.
Yeah, working on it, aren't you, Jake?
Yeah, that's a question. If there's, when the sewer department separated out or became a separate fund,
Yeah.
you know, obviously the sewer department the last 80 years contributed to the fund balance that the village general governmental operations enjoys now. Is some of that fund balance is because sewer either over-realized revenue or underspent the expenses, and that went into the fund balance. When it's separated out to its own fund, the sewer didn't get assigned any of that fund balance, no portion of it, so.
I think that, you know, this is something that the board needs to discuss, Jake, and say, okay, of that $569,000 that is currently owed by the sewer to the general, how much are we willing to say, that's okay, sewer, that's the general fund's contribution to this fund to start that fund. I think that's and then you have to say, is it all of it? Is it half of it? Is it 300,000 of it? How much of it is? And then whatever is left, you need to have a discussion about a repayment schedule. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura.
Happy
I'll be there. Thank you.
Yes.
As I said, we'll be back here in no time.
You know what, we'll do easier.
It's always a pleasure, my dear, always.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
We won't have enough time to miss you.
That's
And you're still operating that. Yeah, well, come on. Just for now. Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna be right. Better do that.
All right, moving on to village business, we are moving into agenda item number 2, resolution to approve the minutes from December 12th, 2019. A chance to look those over. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Trustee Lauer,
Aye.
Trustee Lancy, Trustee Alito, Mayor Byers.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next is a resolution to approve claims and warrants, current cycle and last cycle. I have had the opportunity to look through them. I think the only question Jerry and I had was on the pig bill,
I'm one.
the pig bill.
Called the new
Pig
pig,
bill?
the new pig.
The new pig,
New
we
pig
don't
bill.
want to pay for old pig.
No,
Yeah.
new pig.
So the new pig, those are absorbent cloths, or sometimes they're the tubes that if there's, we use them over at the fire department too, if there's something that's on water, if there's a oil or petroleum product on water, we put those, the tube type pigs, they call them, on, and it'll allow the water to pass through, it'll absorb the oil if there's a spill. I think these are probably, these are blue towels.
Some of them blue towels, and it's also, it's a pack of the round 8-inch, a bunch of them were used by DPW, so.
Yeah, go across thing, yep. Yeah.
Okay. Then, there are no other questions?
I just had a quick one,
Yeah.
Marcia. On the first bank card, can we somehow get an idea of what the charges are for?
Yeah, that's on a summary that I print out and
Oh.
put in the folder.
Oh, in the folder, well,
Board to
then-
approve.
yeah. Oh, okay, so we have to see that.
Yeah.
All right,
I could put that in the packet if you'd like to, going forward.
that would be good, yes.
Okay. Yep, but we have been preparing those, so if you want to see historical
Yeah, good.
information.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if there are no other questions, I'll entertain a motion to pay the bills.
Make that motion.
Second it.
Trustee Lauer,
Aye.
Trustee Alito, Trustee Lancy, Mayor Byers.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next item is agenda item 4, 5, and it's the financial statements. And look those over at your convenience, except for the month of December. We're looking pretty good in most categories, in that we haven't used anything yet, or our percentages are really right close to the middle. So that's good.
And I did address the concern that you had brought up about how that final percentage at the end didn't make any sense.
I noticed that.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
Nicer, easier to read.
yeah.
Thousands of percent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 5, this is a resolution to declare the adoption of local laws 3 and 4 of 2019 as type 2 actions under SECRA. I type 2 action.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Trustee Alito?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next, we'll have a motion then to adopt local law number 3 of 2019, entitled the Accessory Building and Zoning Board of Appeals Procedures, Local Law of 2019. I have a motion to approve and adopt this local law.
I'll second.
Trustee Alito?
Aye.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next, we have a resolution to adopt the local law number 4, entitled amend section 156-15E of the Vehicle and Traffic Code. Do I have a motion to
Heather,
adopt this law?
obviously you gotta fill in the blanks there with the dates.
Yep. Thank you.
And that would be, we would put that down the day, today, right?
Well, no, I meant in the resolution itself, there's blanks for when the village adopted the resolution to set the public hearing, the date when the public hearing was held.
Right.
Those need to be filled in the final resolution. Jake did that one, not me. He didn't fill in the blanks.
I heard you sent a couple over today.
Bus.
Ooh, throwing them under the bus. My goodness.
Sorry.
You did spell Daryl's name right though.
That's true.
So do I have a motion?
Yes, I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Trustee Alito?
Aye.
Trustee Lancy? Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Agenda item number 8 is a resolution to accept the engineering proposal from Labella Associates related to the ready grant to decommission sandbar wells. I noticed that there have been some changes to the previous proposal that I saw. There are, I believe, 3 additional scope of services that have been provided. And that goes along, I think the scope of excluded services is pretty much the same, but the fee also has increased, so.
I'm noticing also in the schedule section at the end, the due date is wrong. The due date is listed as February of 19.
Well, that's a typo, right?
Yeah.
So it's not $8,400?
It is.
It
No,
is
that's
before.
correct.
That's correct.
The due date for the report is February of this year.
Oh, no, well, Darrell said the price increased. I guess I never saw the earlier
No,
one.
you never
Yeah,
saw
lower
the earlier one. The early one had 3 less scope of services that Labella offered. And here there are 3 more, so they increased the scope of service. And obviously, consequently, the cost.
That was adding things for the seeker and for some of the coordination and the engineering report that had to be completed. It's recorded of all the projects is an engineering report. Since this is a joint, we're gonna have to come back later on with the MOU with the town, because this is a joint project with the town, and the town's the lead agency on it. But we're, doing these projects, there's like 5 projects going on down there altogether, but the town's wastewater pump station and our wells are kind of married together as one project. And so we're going to prepare one report, so that report's going to be prepared. This is Labella's portion of the village's stuff for preparing that report, and that's going to get forwarded on to the town engineers and incorporated into one report. And the same with the seeker information as well. And that's what they added on, is the preparation of the report and the seeker, and that's what made the cost go up. And some Friday meetings which we have one tomorrow, so we should be able to get some more information on the path moving forward with this.
Well, while you see Matt Chatfield is here in the audience, and he really wasn't here for this particular grant, but my understanding is that Matt attended the town board workshop meeting tonight where they discussed the Ready Grant. And one of the requests tonight by the town, and Matt can fill in, chime in if I misstated, is that they would like a village board of trustee liaison for this Ready Grant. The town supervisor is their liaison, but they want someone, for example, the meeting tomorrow morning. The supervisor will be there, and they would like someone to be there besides just Jake. So the question is, who's going to raise their hands of course you could name Al, but he's not here.
That's how it works by default.
But,
Like tomorrow
well, obviously, if you can't make tomorrow morning, you can't make tomorrow morning. But they still would like someone designated to be the liaison person. And I figured, well, at least 4 of you are sitting here, and this is now moving at a kind of fast clip now, that maybe you could decide on somebody. I don't see any volunteers, anybody raising their hand
I
here.
will.
What time is the
I'm
meeting?
still alive, I'll
It's
do it.
9:30,
When?
Yeah,
9:30 tomorrow morning.
And it's quite ridiculous that we find this out and nobody knows it. And-
No, my apologies, but
I know, but,
when I got an invite to the meeting on Tuesday.
yeah.
It was set up, it says, hey, this stuff's coming together, this type of meeting. I didn't see any board members on the.
They only decided this
They only
tonight.
decided they wanted.
So, yeah,
They only decided this at 5:30 tonight.
okay.
So,
Well,
That's why they're not
so
on it.
don't get.
I don't know if Tom will necessarily be at the meeting tomorrow. However, they asked that a board member, a board of trustee member, be identified or assigned as a liaison, similar to what they have done with the supervisor. Just so it's everybody, each board has an elected official that's responsible for that. And then, of course, there's staff that are responsible as well.
Yeah, good.
You can't
I can't,
I'll be alternate. You can't.
Yeah, no,
I cannot make it tomorrow.
I can't tomorrow.
Well, they won't expect somebody to
No,
have to
they
be there
just want a
tomorrow.
name,
Correct.
right? They just want a name.
Correct, they will not expect somebody to have to show up tomorrow morning, but they do want a liaison that's gonna stick through it, and there'll probably be weekly meetings, and this is gonna move very fast over the next 6 weeks.
Okay,
So it's gonna be up to somebody who's gonna have to be willing to probably meet Fridays on a regular basis until February
Friday's good, I work Monday, Tuesday,
February.
Wednesday, Friday's good.
February 14th is the actual deadline, although the town would like to have their engineering reports done by February 10th, which is Monday.
Wow. Whoa.
So, it's aggressive, but they want to make sure that they hit the deadline. They don't want any,
Okay,
makes sense. They don't want to miss the deadline.
Right.
all right, good.
So
Right,
trustee
Jake.
Lancy is the volunteer.
Yeah,
Where's the meeting at the town hall?
understood.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll try and confirm shortly if the supervisor's going to be in attendance, because if he's not, then you're more than welcome to come. You're the representative of the,
So,
Yeah,
of the board. You would be more than welcome to attend. We're not going to preclude you from attending.
No, I know I can't make it tomorrow, but
Okay, that's
otherwise.
fine.
and Jake, I did talk to Matt briefly about the MOU that I talked to you about, that you started to put together, and I emailed you some changes to it. Nothing of substance. But I think Matt also indicated that one of the town's concerns is what happens if the grant doesn't cover all the costs, but you addressed that in your MOU, and then I see the proposal with Labella is they're gonna provide us with an engineer's cost estimate. So I think what we should do is take take cost estimate, the town should get an engineer's estimate, take the village engineer's estimate, add them together, see what percentage of the total is the towns and the villages, and that would be the percentage of the grant. And then if the grant doesn't cover it, like you've already got in there, the village will be responsible for its overage and the towns are responsible for what isn't covered by the grant. So, I don't know if you and Jeff are gonna get into that tomorrow or not, but it's,
Yeah, I would.
so bring a copy of,
Yeah.
bring a copy of your MOU, because I think it's pretty on track. It's pretty good.
I've been studying and being taught by this guy downtown.
Okay, so we sort of digressed a little bit, but it's all in the same general topic of the topic of agreement. But now there's, I don't know if anybody made a motion to
No.
No, nobody.
So I
accept
entertain
the
a motion to accept the engineering proposal from Lavella related to the ready grant to decommission the sandbar wells.
I'll make that. I'll second it.
Trustee Lauer?
Aye.
Trustee Abolito? Trustee Lancy?
Aye.
Mayor Byers?
Aye.
Motion passes. They like to trick me.
All right, moving on. John, anything more that you would like to add?
No, that was what I was gonna talk about during my portion, but then I figured since we were talking about the ready grant anyhow, we already, we just did it, so, no.
Okay, thank you. DPW?
The only thing really is the leaves are done, leaf pickup's done. Certainly want to thank the residents for their patience, but also make sure to thank the crews. It was kind of tough for everybody this year, switching between picking up leaves, then plowing snow, then waiting for it to melt, and picking up leaves again, and having it snow again, and keep going back and forth. But we were able to go around and complete another run last week, and so we've done, all the leaves for the fall pickup now. And we will do a spring cleanup. We started that a couple of years ago. It was pretty popular, and that includes, more than just leaves too. So, some of the garden debris and things. So watch from the website, we'll have that scheduled, and we'll try to make announcements at a meeting when that's going to happen as well. But no, I really want to thank the crews. It was a challenging leaf pickup, so.
And with the Christmas trees.
Yep, yeah, we still do brush pickup once a month, and that'll include Christmas trees, and even with the
Nice
Christmas,
job with the trees.
with the Christmas trees too, since they're so usually getting pretty dried out by now, and they blow around so easy. If we've got some time, we'll grab a truck and we'll go around and picking up trees so they don't end up in the middle of the road. But you're definitely scheduled, the first full week of every month, unless we get a big snowstorm and we can't get out for that. But we'll be picking up brush, which will, like I said, will include the Christmas trees. Please try to take your ornaments off. We've got one tree in the back that's got quite a few of them on there that we've got from the trees.
A lot of people throwing out
New
standing out,
connections.
stand and everything.
New ornaments.
Yeah, we get some interesting collection over time, but.
Oh, we can use them on other stuff.
Yeah. No, for what? Why did we say no tree pickup? Just send calls to the back. Went through. We pick up trees. We have for 80 years.
Yeah.
I don't know who.
Thank you.
But yeah, we pick up Christmas trees for sure. That's it.
Do you grind them up?
Yes, yep. We grind them up and people can get wood chips. Those are wood chips. It's not like the mulch or the leaf mulch, or not like what you'll get at the, what the town puts out in their parking lot. It's different from that. That's, the leaves and stuff that are through. These are just wood chips. We give them out, and we also use them in the park. Sometimes we started having to go through since they got started a few years ago in Case Park. I understand now if you start it, you have to kind of maintain it, so, we've been going through. And that's a real challenge to get in there too, because it's very wet, so whenever we get a dry opportunity, we can try to bring some chips up there and put them on the trail.
Thank you. Sewer?
Sewer is flowing.
Very good.
And, you know, when you're looking at, I was thinking about that earlier, when you're looking at the financial things, you'll see certain things that are 100%, already even part of the year, like road salt, ferric chloride, chlorine, things like that, we know, you know, what's in the budget, so we know what we're gonna need for the year, so we have one PO at the beginning of the year, and we work off that PO throughout the year, so, you know, if you see road salt in December's already 100%, you know we have 3 months of winter yet, or it's at 98%, I think, 3 months of winter yet to go. We're not running out of salt yet. Wood will be able to make it, but, you know, we might have to stretch or move some things around later, because obviously that's weather dependent. The Lake John's orders for ferric chloride and chlorine he's got for the whole year once the budget comes out. So those are why those certain items will be up high already, because that includes what we have encumbered. That's it.
Thank
Good
you.
luck to you, Daddy.
Thank you. We'll see him here in a second, I suspect.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that you'd like to bring up? I would announce that our next meeting will be on January 23rd, 2020, here in the boardroom. And if there are no other items to be discussed, I would make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.